Welcome to the Career Refresh Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Griffin. I'm a former media and marketing executive turned career strategist and executive coach. I spent my career working my way up and through the ranks of global organizations and startups, and today I show others how to do the same. Join me each week as we discuss the strategies and actionable steps to leverage your strengths, increase your confidence, and develop your career well-being. Ready? Let's do it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Career Refresh Podcast. Okay, today I'm really excited to introduce you to this incredible woman who has become a dear friend of mine, Barry Franco. She is a speaking and thought leadership coach, and she is the founder of the Made for This collective. She spent the last 12 years supporting many well-known entrepreneurs in crafting compelling messages and programs. As a high-impact speaking coach, she helps clients share their message and their story on podcasts, presentations, leaderships, through books, TEDx stages. I mean, this is the real deal, people, and at the top conferences around the world. She is the host of the podcast Speak Up, Show Up, and is the author of Beyond Applause, Making a Meaningful Difference Through Transformational Speaking. You can learn more at michellebarryfranco.com, and I will put all the links to everything we discussed today in the show notes. But I want to welcome Michelle.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here, Jill. Thank you for having me.
I love it. I love it. All right. So I want us to start at the beginning. I want us to go back to the early years. Tell us, when you were a child, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
When I was a child, the earliest thing that I remember wanting to be, besides a teacher, I think a teacher at some point, when I had like an awesome teacher in grade school, I thought this looks amazing. But it was sort of a passing phase. It was a therapist. So this would probably be more like, a tween and then into my early teens is when I was really kind of specific. And then that was for years, all the way through college. I thought I would be a therapist.
Okay, it's so interesting. So while our listeners don't know yet, I see how that connects into what you're doing today, which is so interesting. Okay, we're going to get there, everyone, I promise. All right, take us through your career journey from a high level, Michelle, right? You started, what was your first couple of career choices post-university?
So while I was in college, I worked all through college, most 30 to, sometimes even 40 hours a week. So I didn't have like the traditional or typical, like go away to college and live in a dorm kind of thing.
Right there with you. Yeah. Me too there. Yeah. Work through college.
So what I was doing during college actually informed, what I did right afterward. My dad was a State Farm agent. He's retired now, State Farm Insurance. And one of my first jobs was working in his office as a, front office person, did kind of a little bit of everything, including some sales, but a lot of customer service, that kind of thing, taking claims. So then when I graduated from college, you could then become a claims rep or estimator, they were sometimes called. You had to go through this whole process, and I made it through the whole process. And that was my first job. I was a fire claims rep. So when somebody would have a fire in their home or a flood or some other, disaster, I would go out to their house and measure it, do a whole estimate of what it would cost to rebuild that area, which astounds me as I'm saying it to you again, and then write them a check.
Wow.
So that was my first job. And it was fine. I liked going to people's houses and talking to people, and it was now I think about me knowing how to rebuild or, replace a wall fascinates me, because I would like cut a check for what it would cost for a contractor to do that. But, I knew it wasn't my calling. It just was a good thing for me to start with. I got to travel a little bit in that job. And I didn't travel a lot when I was younger. So that was just sort of a fun, I saw the bigger world. And then I left that job and took some time off for a little bit I knew I wanted to go to grad school. So then I went to grad school for speech communication studies. And that happened because I was at a dinner.
What's the impetus there? Yeah.
Yeah. I was at a dinner with another couple. I was with my then boyfriend back then. And the woman who I was meeting, we were talking about what we do, just that kind of thing. And she said she taught communication courses at San Francisco State University. And I was living in South San Francisco at the time. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And, at the time I knew I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what it was. I said, how did you get to do that? And she said, I got my master's degree at San Francisco State University. And if you want, as part of that program, you can teach some classes. And then I just stayed on. And I was like, okay, I'll go get my master's in that. That sounds good. And that's what I did.
And then I know that you did work for, senior executives at a different point. How did that come to fruition?
Yeah, that was pretty soon after. So while I was in my master's degree program studying speech communication studies, I was an executive assistant for CFO, CEO in startups. So I was in Silicon Valley at the heart of, the .com era, in a startup, supporting these executives. We were doing public funding, private funding. Sorry. So we were just doing the whole slide decks for, round B funding, all of that.
It's crazy. You must have some crazy stories.
It's funny, you see the movies now. It's funny to have sort of lived through something that you see sort of in the media at later times. And certainly parts of it are true, right? People really did stack cans. They stayed all night. They did, a lot of those things, but the cubicles were decorated at times. I didn't stay all night. I was pretty clear at the time, this is what I'm doing while I finish graduate school. And it just made sense because of having worked in my dad's office initially. I worked for a number of State Farm agents. So I had front office and administrative experience. So it was I'll do this while I go to grad school. And it was great. I loved it.
How did you have the gumption at that age to set those boundaries that you weren't staying all night in a culture that is clearly driving towards that?
I think it was a mindset, you talk about a lot. And I did not believe that I needed this job in order to survive. It was paying my bills. So it's not like I had some other way to, make an income or to support myself. At least for most of this. Part of that time I was living with a partner and, we were sharing. So I had that sort of extra support. But I just knew, I don't know. I believed I could get another job if I needed to.
I love it. No, it's mindset. Yeah. It totally is mindset. It keeps you free and not clingy or, in that sort of low hum of anxiety that a lot of us experience. I get that. Okay. So then what happened from there? When you eventually finished school, right? You went out on your own. Take us into that part of your story.
Yeah. So I finished school and oh my gosh. And as part of that, I started teaching at the college level. So I started teaching at San Francisco State University and absolutely loved it. That is when I found I enjoyed all my other jobs, even in corporate. And I think partly because I wasn't afraid there. I had such a great time and I performed, I think, at my top ability. Because of that, I really am certain of that. I had a lot of people around me who were miserable. So I could have been, but I just wasn't, Yeah. And anyway, so I started teaching as part of my master's degree program and found my calling and then did that off and on part-time. And by then I was working and then I started working full-time. I was done with school. And again, I taught part-time at night. Sorry, I'm trying to remember back to the times. I taught the courses at night. And then I decided I wanted to leave. I was in high tech. I knew there was something else I needed to do. I was going through a divorce. I felt like I was super in my head. Everything was about what I was thinking. I was very in my head and I knew I needed to connect with a different part of me. So I saved up, decided to leave my job I still taught at night, but I got my massage certification.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was kind of like a pendulum decision. I'm like, I was so intellectualizing my life and I could feel that that's what I was doing. And of course, divorce, it was like this whole time of transformation. And so I got my massage certificate, not because I thought it was the thing I'd do forever, but because I knew I wanted to connect to my own body more and just sort of like, learn how to focus on something besides thinking.
Oh, that is really, really interesting. What were some of the early experiences, like those early learnings to connect into your body that, once you were massage working on others, how did you end up connecting into your own body?
I mean, it's built in to the training. So I think that's what it would have taken for me to understand what it meant to get out of my head and into my body. I mean, I remember going to a therapist at the time and she said to me, you need to tap into your feelings. And I said, I don't know what you mean. And she said, just like tap into your, and I said, well, I go for drives and I like just think, but I open the windows and she's like, that's not the same. And I couldn't now after going to massage school and then later, another degree that I can tell you about if you want. But I saw that what I wish she had said to me was, what are the sensations you're feeling in your body? I didn't even know how to look for that. And you learn that in massage school because that's what you're doing. You're noticing it on yourself when other people are massaging you as you're learning the strokes. And it was cool.
Wow. Yeah. And I think that is really interesting to our listeners is that so often in corporate, we're told to not be emotional and this is not about feelings. This is business, and one of the things that I say so often is I had that philosophy too in the beginning, but it was when I started to learn how to tap into my feelings and use them as fuel. I don't mean I was in the corner crying in the office, although that might've happened once or twice at some point in my career. I mean more of like, okay, this sensation of this collaboration, this amazing feat that my colleagues and I pulled off and the victory and the win of that all, and had that feeling of that community collaboration, that joy, that focus, that determination, remembering to tap into that 2 months after the event when it's a hard day so that I can regenerate that and then go into meetings with colleagues and clients and building from that space. And it's such an important part, I think, of the work that we as leaders are doing to be able to know almost how to turn on the faucet at any time in order to tap into what it is that we need. So I love that you did it literally through the embodiment of massage on your body. That is very, very cool.
One thing that I'm thinking of as you're saying that, it's like it was having the embodied experience that I could call back on. So when I think of you saying this to your clients, to the leaders you work with, it's like when you can call attention, which I just think it's so beautiful that you're doing this, when you can call it attention and know, okay, notice this, then you've got an embodied experience to call back on. We spend our lives at and I do this still too. Like I forget all the time. I'm not doing massage anymore, we spend our lives not noticing the sensations in our body and what it feels like.
Yeah. I often will say to people, so how do you feel about that? And they'll respond with, well, I think that it's like, no, we'll get to your thoughts. But right now I want to know how it feels. How do you feel about that disappointment? How do you feel about that victory? How do you feel about that circumstance that happened? So then bring us into how this became the work that you do today. I mean, with full disclosure, Michelle has helped me in a lot of my speaking and really helping me to come out with talking about my invisible disability and, the way I want to show up in the world. And this idea of working with a leadership coach and a speaking coach was something that I'd always dreamed of. And then, of course, here I found her in the incarnate, which was amazing. But how did you make that pivot then to this? And then for everyone listening, we're going to get into, how storytelling brings forth your leadership, how you need that as a leadership skill. We're going to get into that too. So definitely stick around. Michelle, tell us.
How did this want to be
100%.
therapist, like
Right.
administer or executive assistant, massage therapist, do this. I can only, just as Steve Jobs said, I can connect the dots looking backward. But, I couldn't, of course, see them going forward. It was sort of like I had this skill set. I had a couple of babies around the time we just left off. And I thought I would stay home for a while. And I did stay home for a little while. And then I just started, getting antsy. And I was like, I love this, but I also want to do more out in the world. So I decided, well, first of all, I decided to go back to school, and I'll just, I was going to go become a therapist, right? That was always the plan. So,
right.
I, started a master's degree program and spent a year in that master's degree program to become a therapist. And it was lovely. I loved it. But I had a moment, a Saturday morning with two of my best friends who were in the program, sitting with my youngest daughter in a sling on my lap in this gorgeous cafe. And this voice comes into my head and says, "You don't need this degree. You already have everything you need to do the work you're meant to do."
Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah. And I don't like that voice.
Was it your own voice? Was it the sound of your own voice telling you? Or was it another voice?
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm not, I don't feel like I get all these downloads or I have I know it was a thought. Of course, I know it was a thought, but it felt so random and so out of context. I was literally having a wonderful morning with two people I get to spend tons of time with in the program. And I was learning cool things. And so it felt, I don't know, how sometimes you have a thought that like lands as truth. It just is in grounded truth. Yeah. And that's what it felt like. It had a different texture, a different feling. So I don't remember what it sounded like. I more remember what it felt like. Okay. And I sat with my friends. I didn't say anything because I was like, what? And I went home and I said to Jim, my husband, "I think I'm going to quit the program." He was like, "What?" Like, here I was just happy in the program before that. Right. And within 7 days, I had put a hold on my degree, and I created a trifold brochure to be as a communication consultant.
Wow.
I had no idea what it meant to start a business. I mean, I knew what it meant in theory. I just didn't know what I had ahead of me. Right. And I didn't even really know what a communication consultant, quote unquote, did or who I'd work with. But I tossed it out there, and I had a client, I sent them out in the mail, and like the next day or the day after, whenever she got it, our realtor who had sold us our house a couple of years before called and said, "I want to work with you." So I had my first client. She referred me to another client, and pretty soon I was a copywriter, which was not the plan, but that's what, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
So that's how it started.
I love that you mailed the brochure too. That's kind of amazing.
Trifold brochure. So as part of this, me figuring out my business, I would go to networking events and I would hear people try to talk about what they do. And even though I probably wasn't nailing it either, I knew how I could help them because, I wasn't even sure what this business was I was doing. So I ended up speaking at some of these networking events about business communication. And at one of those early speaking events, a woman held up her business card. Might have been the very first one. Held up her business card as I was walking back to my seat after speaking for like 15 minutes or whatever, and said, "Call me." And this is one of the most powerful women in our community, like, just someone who's involved in everything and everywhere. And I realized, then people came up and talked to me afterward. And I was like, hey, this whole getting up there and talking to a whole room full of people, there's something in that. And I was teaching public speaking in college. So it's not like I knew about public speaking, but I did not make that connection between speaking and the power to move and influence a room full of people toward your business, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say most of our listeners are actually employees. So when we take it into that world, what makes storytelling so effective for leadership?
Because it's human. And we are storytelling creatures. It's actually built into our brain anatomy. I know you already know this, but let's just talk about it anyway,
Tell
right?
them.
It's like, that's why we are built to be captivated by story. So part of it is, literally brain science. And, they've done studies where it's like, when I'm telling you a story and you're in the audience, if I, especially if I give a level of detail that allows you to sort of like join the picture, even though they can't possibly be the same picture, my brain, the way my brain is lighting up, telling you the story is the same as the way that audience is lighting up. Like we are literally connected across space and time. When we tell story, it's a unique connection. So there's that part of it. And then there's just like the human experience. Like I'm a human, you're a human. When you tell a story, especially, and this is an important part of it, when you have audience intimacy, which is my way of saying really rich audience analysis, you know who they are, you know what they care about, you have a sense of what their life is like, so that when you tell that story, you can reflect back to them some of their own experience and show your connection, show that you get it. That's what story can do.
Let's take it a step deeper and make it real. One of the things that I saw both throughout my corporate career and something that I work with clients on individually is telling their own story, whether that is for a job interview, whether that is at a networking event, whether that is to connect with a new client or a new colleague or elevate yourself internally, whatever it is, again, it's that storytelling. So what are some of the ways that you would recommend, maybe it's both mentally and physically, that someone starts to really pause and rethink how they're telling their story? What would you recommend for people to do to start?
Yeah, I love that. Because storytelling can be very intimidating. Some people love it and think they're great storytellers or are great storytellers. There's a distinction sometimes, but many people that I've met are actually nervous to tell stories, especially in the corporate business context. There's this fear that they'll be boring, or that people won't see the relevance and they'll stop listening, or they'll cut them off. And all those things can happen. I know, I get it. It really can happen. And so the most important thing we do in any kind of speaking, including storytelling, is that audience analysis. And I mean a really rich audience analysis. And this is game changing. And because I do, public speaking training in many, many companies and many of the well-known companies out there, I can tell you with confidence that it's a game changer that most people don't really know very much about. People are used to thinking about what should I say? What do I want to say? It's the wrong question. What does this audience, and especially the most important stakeholders in this audience, what do they most want to hear? And then what do I need for them to hear? And that's true about all the content, but also the stories. When the story is relevant to that, and with a senior audience, you got to contextualize why you're telling a story oftentimes. So you might say something like, well, let me give you an example, right? And then they're ready for a story, but they have to know why you're telling it. Otherwise, their brain is going, where are we going with this? Where are we going with this? Right?
So in the reality, like I think about any of my, myself at times and my clients that are in sales or business development, and they're going to meet, with CMOs and business leaders of major companies. They may know a little bit. They may do, if they're working with me, I know that they're doing some LinkedIn snooping. They're trying to figure out what they can find out about the attendees in the room. What would you recommend people do if they really can't find much more than a couple of pieces of insight from a LinkedIn bio or a quote from a recent trade or the press? How would you recommend that they go about doing audience analysis if there's a lot of unknowns?
That comes up a lot, actually, especially in corporate environments, because it feels like we don't know. It feels like a bigger mystery, but it's actually less of a mystery than we often think. And I'm not saying that we know the intimate details of any one person's life, because we probably don't know that. But there's a lot we can extrapolate from the role that the person has inside of an organization. There's a lot we can extrapolate from what's going on culturally inside the organization or inside that team. Now, it might not show up on a LinkedIn profile. So that's where if it's not inside your company, you might ask yourself or look through your own context, who do I know that I could ask? If this is a high stakes conversation you're going to have, it is worth it to dive as deep as you can from every direction to understand what can I know about what's going on for this leader or this team or in this company. But also, I think what gets forgotten often that really can make the storytelling powerful is remembering that every CMO, CEO, every C-suite person, leader, person in a company is a human. So the things they care about are not just what's happening professionally. Now, that doesn't mean we lead with, I know you're, working on work-life balance, or, we don't lead with that. But when we tell our stories, those details can actually create a beautiful connection. When we tell, and again, it sort of depends on the context, but if you're trying to sell them, something that's going to make their work life easier, a software program or something, and you include the part about them staying home late and missing things, with their family or with, their friends that are going out because they're working all these hours, like give them the whole context, not just assuming that they spend all their time and only care about being at work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So that feels, it feels like we're blending sort of the general knowns about humanity with context in the business.
Yeah, that's right. And we have general knowns about humanity, and there's a few cool things to think about there. Most of us want to be recognized for our highest vision of ourselves. So when we're recognizing sort of like who a person is, what they care about, you want to assume the best about them, right? I know that you want to give back to your community. I know that you want to spend time with your family or, your parents, your aging parents, whatever. It's like when we are given that reflection back to us, again, in any content, but in storytelling as well, we feel good about ourselves as listeners / audience members. And it sort of creates more of that trust and connection. When you said general things about humanity, that's true. But also leaders are actually struggling with different things, often, but not always, than an individual contributor inside the company. Maybe personally as well as professionally, maybe.
How would you suggest people approach the idea of boring content? Like sometimes you might just be in a field that you really enjoy what you do, but you're working with data or elements of it that might be really like labeled as boring content. How can you make that more engaging?
Yeah, I love this question. I know I keep saying that, but I do love these. And this one especially, I mean, I worked in insurance. Listen, I worked in insurance and I serve a lot of financial institutions with training. So this comes up all the time. And here's the first thing I'll say, which is you can't be boring. Facts, you can't. Because people's brains won't listen. We can't. Especially now when we have so much stimulation to kind of heighten our brain's desire for, pleasure, delight. So that said, again, I won't stay on this very long, but I, of course, am going to say, you better know who you're talking to and what they care about, because that is how you make any content not boring. Well, listen, when I went to an insured's house and they had a, kitchen fire, nothing I said to them was boring. Not one thing, right? Because they care in that moment. When we talk about insurance with story, when we talk about families who might lose their home, when we tell stories about families who lost their home and then were able to replace it, insurance is not boring.
Right.
But if you read to me from the policy with that like super thin paper, because it can't even fit in an envelope, that is boring. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's the same with all data, right? All data, someone cares about it first of all. And then if you're supposed to present it to someone, ask yourself, why am I being asked to present this to them? And then why should they care?
Give listeners what they can do right now. They just found out they have a huge pitch next week. They're going in to meet executive leadership of a company, and they need to have their story down. They need to have their presentation going. So they immediately start on audience analysis. You've made that clear. Try to find connections, try to find what you can, get that together. Then what do they do?
Yes. So this is so exciting because oftentimes I'm going to share a process that I think most people aren't doing. And this will change everything around your content and your confidence in creating presentations going forward. So yes, of course, audience analysis and really deep, rich understanding, and really keep them in mind the whole time. This is an important thing. Just have them with you as you go through the process. But the first thing that I will say is, as soon as you know you have this pitch or presentation coming up, grab a folder, an empty folder. On the little tab, write, the name of it, just a working title, so that you know what this folder's for, and then write down everything you can think of right then related to this, anything that comes to you, even if you're not sure if you'll use it, put it inside that folder. And now you've started. And there's magic in starting because our brain gets activated around this task, this project. Now, when you're in the shower, you're driving, the ideas can come and you can add them in. You have a folder for it. You've got a place to hold it, jot it on anything you have near you. Again, sticky notes are awesome because they're movable, one idea per sticky note. But if you just have a piece of paper, write it on there. So you have this beginning folder. Now, when you've decided to start working on it, and here's the more actively, first of all, I just want to say speaking anxiety is stealthy. So it sounds not like, oh, I'm really nervous about this, especially for people who do a lot of speaking, maybe. It sounds more like I don't have time. It sounds like I'm going to start this in 2 weeks. It's, that is often all at least partially driven by just the idea that we could be rejected comes from our primal brain, right? Our primal brain says, if this audience, whoever it is, rejects me, I actually might be tossed out into the wild weather and killed by a neighboring tribe or something. So that's public speaking is like a built-in anxiety. Now, not everybody has it the same way. And some of us have transformed the way we think about the sensations in our body. But I think it's important to say that here because it often does cause the procrastination that makes the process I'm going to share with you more difficult to do. So,
okay. That's a really good call out. If you start to see yourself procrastinating, it's really a mindset and some feeling of anxiety or fear around the situation. Okay. Yeah. What else?
So then walk away from your computer. And what I mean is you've decided you're going to give some time to creating this presentation. Grab your notebook, grab that folder, and grab a stack of sticky notes if you can, and walk away and just go analog, go away from when we're in front of our computer, we're often thinking more linearly. It's not our place of greatest creativity. I mean, even people who create beautiful things on the computer will tell you most of the time that beautiful thing started far away from their computer. So give yourself that space, even if it's like sitting in the lobby of your company or in another room in your house, if you're working from home, and just start, again, jotting down all of your ideas, any ideas you have. If you can use sticky notes, the cool thing about that is each idea becomes mobile and you can start to organize your talk with, right inside that folder.
But I love that you're bringing this. I love that you bring this out because we used to, myself and a few colleagues, leadership used to have a process that we would call pitch on a page. And what we were noticing was so many of our colleagues and our newer colleagues were coming in and starting to tell the presentation or starting to build the story directly into Keynote or to PowerPoint. Now they're wasting effort and time in making it pretty, but you don't know what you're saying yet. Yes. So taking a step away. And what's also interesting is I had the pleasure of working in strategy innovation at the agency side for Microsoft, and I actually worked on the team for Microsoft Office. And there is no greater feedback on your use of a tool than if you're actually talking to the team who created the tool.
Yes.
So you could be presenting in PowerPoint, which is the tool they created. And someone would say, just could you stop for 1 second? Why didn't you insert smart art there? And you're like, sweet baby Jesus. Oh my God. Like, you're not using their tool correctly. And one of the biggest things they taught me is that a PowerPoint or a slide deck or a keynote, whichever, Canva, whatever you're using to tell your story, is not supposed to be, this enormous, intense, copy-ridden thing. If you taped every slide on the wall, the lead or the copy on the page could very gently tell the story. Not going to be grammatically correct, people, right? But that is one of the ways that we did it. And the other thing that we did was, you have 10 slides, your font does not go less than 20, and your presentation is no more than 30 minutes if you're using a tool like that. So those were some of the things that we found that were really, really impactful in storytelling and getting our point across. What other tools would you throw in that bin?
Well, the one you said, early on in this part of our discussion, right, around message, it's like, you don't know what you're going to say yet. So step away from the slides, go figure out what you're going to say. The first thing you need to know as far as content is what I call your juicy core message. If this is an influencing, which most, but not all of our presentations are, even when we think they're not, they should be, you want to know if they want. So you're going to have, this is a very rough first way to start it. If you want, then you must. And this is whatever they want. So if whoever's doing this presentation, what does this audience want? And you're going to say to them, if you want this thing you want, then you must. And then what is your point of view? What do they need to do? What is this presentation about? And that is your organizing, sort of like your thesis, right? I just call it your juicy core message. Yep. And it reminds you, now you know what to build content around. This is the only thing I'm proving out in this particular presentation, this one thing. Then I recommend 3 main points most of the time. Sometimes it's 4. Every once in a while, it's 2 if it's a really short presentation. If you have 5 or more, it's very hard for them to remember. Likely, you can combine a few of them. And when you have these main points, created in a way that they get to see that this is the map, right? You're creating a map for them. And then you can, they can put it in their shopping bag. I think of people in the audience, like coming in with a shopping bag, they want something. That's the only reason they're going to pay attention to you, even if they're sitting in the room. You want them to be able to put it in that shopping bag and walk out of that room with it. So you need good structure. And then you want the magic mix of content. And that is, you want research and data. You want stories, and you want audience engagement. And sometimes audience engagement activities are just things like, now think about this for a minute, or remember the last time. You can even just have them go into their brains. You want to pull them back into the content. That's what those 3 elements are for.
So good. Okay. Let me ask you the one final question that so many people ask me all the time. How do you remove fillers from your speech? The ums, the likes, the you knows, the patterns. Obviously people aren't going to create that in one sitting, but what are some of the steps they can take to become better speakers and remove some of those fillers?
I'm going to say 2 things primarily about this. Number 1, don't worry about it so much. We actually like natural conversation. And in natural conversation, we use fillers. It's a normal part. And I know that some people use too many and that it is a distraction. So first of all, you may not need to do anything about it at all and stop worrying about it, and you will automatically use them less. Number 1. Number 2, if you know that you use them in a way that's distracting, most of the time that's happening because you haven't prepared. You're filling because you're thinking. If you have a juicy core message. You've gathered your content. You know what your call to action is. You know how you're introducing this, and you have practiced, practiced, and practiced. You know what you're going to say next in general, at least, right? I'm not saying you should not, don't go learn a script. Don't recommend it unless you're doing a TED Talk. We could talk about that another time. But otherwise, extemporaneous is best, but prepare so that you're not filling space thinking about the next thing you're going to say.
I think that's brilliant and spot on. So a little bit of the release valve, like it may not be a problem, but one of the ways to check in with yourself is, did you do your homework? Did you actually practice this? I think sometimes we review the presentation in our heads, and I would actually say the words out loud so that you know, is this like word soup? Are you getting blah, 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 like caught on your words? Actually practicing it versus just reading the page in your head. I think that is really, really important for people to know. So Michelle, I know that you work in different ways. I know you work at the corporate level, you work at the group level, and you work at the individual level. Give the listeners a little bit more about how they could work with you.
So yes, I work with individual thought leaders and people who are out there speaking on TEDx stages and keynote stages. Often they've written a book and they're telling their story as part of their work in the world. And then I do corporate training, mostly around presentation skills. The brillianceatwork.com is for the corporate training, and michellebarryfranco.com. You can learn more. If you are interested in the journey of thought leadership, and by the way, I mean both external and internal thought leadership, it's absolutely beneficial to your career to think of yourself as an internal thought leader, the go-to person around whatever it is that you're doing. So I wrote a book called Beyond Applause. And you can get a free digital copy of that on my website at michellebarryfranco.com, or you can get it on Amazon. Those are ways to find me.
Wonderful. Always a delight. I'm going to put the links that you mentioned and where they can get your ebook in the show notes. And I just thank you. I mean, this, I feel like, is the start of many conversations that I would like to have, you have with my listeners, because this part of their work and leadership of understanding the impact of storytelling and how we can create so much effectiveness and influence with improving our storytelling is one of my own personal missions. And I want everyone to be able to tell better stories. And I know it's a big mission of yours too. So thank you, Michelle. I really, really appreciate you.
Thank you. I've loved it too. And I can't wait for the next one.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Career Refresh podcast. If you're enjoying this and you want more information, go to my website, jillgriffincoaching.com. There you can find information on how to work with me one-on-one, or my group programs, or even bring me into your workplace. I'll put the link to my website in the show notes. But hey, listen, before you go, do me a favor, rate and review this podcast, because it definitely helps me get the word out to people everywhere so that they can also thrive in the workplace. All right, friends, I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.